I'm 4 years into this investigation, and it's been a slow incremental process because, frankly, a lot of the information I initially uncovered and developed through sources was unbelievable. And so when you hear these nearly fantastic stories, it stretches credibility, it stretched mine. With any source, you always have some element of healthy skepticism. But over time, digging in and checking these sources, doing all this sort of nitty-gritty investigative work, over time you build a mosaic and you realize what you're looking at. It's an entire process in running a particular source, and this is basic sort of intelligence tradecraft. There is no story without the sources that we have. Very brave people have put themselves in great personal danger to come forward with information. Over the course of this investigation, I've conducted interviews of and developed source relationships with a variety of people, dozens in fact, both law enforcement, intelligence officers, civilians, public officials, and even some unsavory characters. The story's tough to tell because if you don't tell it carefully, people are going to be killed.
Planning further terror attacks against the United States.
Al-Qaeda has a senior operative that is so familiar with America.
He's identified as, and they don't know where he is. Al-Qaeda terror activity. Another Mohammed Atta may pose an imminent threat to U.S. interests worldwide. Jafar, the pilot.
Narco-terrorist.
Charge of all global operations.
To truck bomb the Chicago studios. Was at one time an FBI informant.
The FBI and Homeland Security was in his
not
apartment.
Providing any details about this case.
In 2009, a small plane flown from Mexico into the United States containing 2 high-ranking Al-Qaeda leaders landed at a private airstrip outside El Paso, Texas. The men met with a group of cartel operatives at a residence in nearby Anthony, New Mexico. Leading the meeting was senior Al-Qaeda leader Adnan Shukra-Juma.
Adnan Shukra-Juma is a trained operative who poses an operational threat to the United States.
One FBI official ranked him among the top 5 terrorists who pose a threat to the U.S.
Shukra-Juma was known in intelligence circles to be a high-ranking member of Al-Qaeda. He was, in fact, believed to be one of the people who'd be involved in the second wave of attacks that we were quite worried about right after the 9/11 attacks.
Andrew McCarthy is a former federal prosecutor and a New York Times best-selling author. In 1995, he led the successful prosecution against 12 jihadists for their roles in the 1993 bombing of the World Trade Center. McCarthy says Shukra-Juma's connections to terrorism were rooted in his family.
The father, Adnan's father, Gulsher Shukra-Juma, is somebody who's been known to run in Islamist circles in the United States for some time.
Gulsher Shukra-Juma founded the Masjid Nur al-Islam Mosque in Brooklyn, New York, and maintained close ties to the notorious Al-Farouq Mosque, also located in Brooklyn.
They were charged with using the Al-Farouq Mosque in Brooklyn to raise money for Al-Qaeda and Hamas.
And it was a mosque that the guy who I prosecuted back in the mid-1990s, the blind sheikh, Omar Abdel Rahman, was one of the mosques where he preached in. Really significant, I think, is the fact that you would be the kind of mosque that would have the blind sheikh come and preach his Sharia supremacism at, because everybody in those circles knew exactly who he was and what he was about. He was pretty openly calling for attacks against the United States. Subtlety was not his thing. There was not a lot of mystery about what you were getting if you were bringing the blind sheikh into your mosque.
In 1995, Golsher Shukrajuma moved his family to Florida.
Shukrajuma is a Broward County, Florida kid. He came here as a young child, grew up here in the United States. So he's completely Americanized, very familiar, very comfortable with the United States.
Adnan attended Broward County Community College, where he studied computer science and received flight training. He regularly attended two mosques, the Masjid al-Hijra and the Darul Uloom Institute. Both have documented ties to terrorism. It was at those radical mosques where Adnan became connected with some of the most dangerous terrorists in the world, including Jose Padilla and 9/11 ringleader Mohammed Atta.
But that's his lineage, right? That's his environment that he's growing up in. And so he's steeped in a mentality of militant Islam that is the foundation for how he operates.
In the months before 9/11, Adnan fled the country and received terror training with Padilla in Afghanistan. His father claimed his son left for Saudi Arabia after graduating from college in May 2001. By 2003, the FBI was desperately searching to find Adnan Shukrajuma, calling him the next Mohammed Atta.
U.S. authorities believe he was in the United States after September 11th, after the 9/11 attacks, and they don't know where he is. He could be here, he could be anywhere in the world, and they're hoping that they'll get cooperation from law enforcement authorities worldwide in trying to find him.
The mastermind of the 9/11 attacks, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, gave authorities his name under enhanced interrogation after he was captured in 2003. He told U.S. officials that bin Laden personally commanded Shukrajuma to carry out attacks on U.S. soil. Padilla also revealed Shukrajuma's identity during interrogations at a military prison.
I told you that Padilla recognized this other Al-Qaeda expert this Al-Qaeda operative who was to be his partner, recognized him immediately, and you will too. Because that other operative was Adnan Shukrajuma, also known as Jafar, or Jafar the pilot, a man that the Attorney General and the FBI Director told this country about last week, one of the 7 we want so badly to find. Jafar took another path and remains out there somewhere and is extraordinarily dangerous, an explosives expert who is also an experienced commercial pilot.
According to the FBI, Shukrajuma replaced Khalid Sheikh Mohammed as Al-Qaeda's chief planner of attacks on American soil.
He wasn't a gopher. He wasn't somebody waiting to receive instructions. He was an operational commander for North America. And he had the latitude and authority to direct and conduct operations on his own word. He wasn't waiting for anybody to tell him what to do. So Adnan Shukrajuma was piloting a plane, but sitting next to him is Jaber al-Baneh, who's referred to as Jasper. That's his nickname by people, at least in the United States.
Jaber al-Baneh is a Yemeni American who was closely associated with the Lackawanna 6 terror cell near Buffalo, New York. He trained in terror tactics in Afghanistan just months before 9/11.
The FBI says 36-year-old Jaber al-Baneh, like the 6 other Lackawanna men who have now pleaded guilty to supporting Al-Qaeda, traveled to the Al-Farouk terrorist camp in Afghanistan for training.
al-Baneh was placed on the FBI's most wanted list in February 2006 after escaping from a Yemeni jail.
Al-Baneh is a Yemeni who's very comfortable in the United States, perhaps almost to the same level as Shukrajuma would be. And if you think of Shukrajuma as the general, Al-Baneh is his aide-de-camp, or perhaps a colonel. He's another senior operator. He's knowledgeable. He has authority and power. He has direct ties back to Al-Qaeda.
It's always been my fear that some of these high-level leaders would try to get over here and start planning things here.
Jonathan Gilliam is a retired U.S. Navy SEAL. From 2005 to 2011, he served as a special agent with the FBI in New York City.
For them to send out orders from overseas is one thing, but to see them come into the United States and actually start, helping plan and give orders, that just shows a whole nother level of commitment, and it shows a drastic shift in their mindset and where their dedication is. I mean, you don't just go embed yourself into where you want to start a war unless you're serious about starting a war.
They piloted a small private plane into an airfield called Cielo Dorado in Anthony, New Mexico.
So how far are we right now from the Mexican border?
You know, maybe 8 miles,
Okay.
something like that. We are about to turn into Cielo Dorado right now.
So if I fly an airplane in from Mexico, where's the customs?
There's none. It simply doesn't exist.
Isn't that unlawful?
One would think so. And you see that that is a straight shot pointing all the way down south to Mexico. There's the airfield.
8 miles, right?
Correct.
Pretty common knowledge that for years, airplanes would fly in from Mexico, and they would land there in Cielo Dorado, and you could unload whatever you needed to do.
So is Cielo Dorado used for trafficking and smuggling?
It's been like that since it first opened. It's pretty well known.
You have very wealthy people who are aviators, great fans of aviation. I'm not saying that everybody who lives here is, you know, some kind of cartel operative or a trafficker.
But we do know that someone who's very high up in Al-Qaeda did land here.
That is correct.
It probably means that's not the first time that they've gotten people in this way. And that's really scary when you think about it.
All of this multi-billion-dollar security infrastructure that we've built in the wake of 9/11 has been singularly justified by the need to keep these guys out of the country. So if they can, notwithstanding everything we've done, if they can sneak into the country and operate here, we got a real problem.
That to me is a very telling thing. I mean, again, you don't bring high-level guys into enemy territory, which the United States for them is enemy territory, where you're going to wage war. You wouldn't really bring them in unless you're going to try to either inspire or actually do the planning and the leading and start it from here.
Do we know where he had his meeting?
We do. We know that it was in Anthony, New Mexico, in a private home. I've spoken with the person who was physically present in the house with them when all of this transpired, when these meetings took place. An FBI agent gave a picture of Shukr Juma to the person who was in the meeting and said, "Do you know this person?" And they said, "Yeah, he's right here." They texted in this picture of El Banay. And they said, "Are these guys, do you know these guys?" And yeah, they're right here. So this isn't my one source saying something. These are multiple sources with information confirmed by the FBI as the meeting was occurring in 2009.
I think very highly of Judicial Watch. I think if they had sources who were saying that Islamist terrorists were operating in the border region in the southern United States and Mexico, I would take that very seriously, not just on its face, but knowing, as I know that, for example, the director of the FBI in either 2005 or 2006 gave testimony in Congress about efforts by jihadist networks to smuggle people across the southern border.
What can you tell us about the number of individuals entering the United States from countries with known Al-Qaeda connections?
I can tell you that we are concerned, that Homeland Security is concerned about special interest aliens coming in the United States. We have ongoing investigations into smuggling organizations that may be assisting in getting special agent aliens across the border. It is a tremendous concern to us, and I know it's a tremendous concern to Homeland Security, and we're working together to try to identify those smuggling organizations and take them out of business.
What I'm hearing from Judicial Watch is not only on just on its own face very serious, but it's also consistent with other things we know.
It's a web of ties between drug gangs, terrorists, politicians, law enforcement. Everybody's got a little angle here in the border area. It's all about one thing, money and power.
El Paso, Texas is marketed as America's safest city.
4 of the nation's largest cities with the lowest rates of violent crime are in border states: San Diego, Phoenix, Austin, and right here in El Paso.
I certainly think that El Paso is the safest city for a number of reasons. We don't have wild public health issues. We don't have issues with violent crime.
We are the safest city in the U.S. with more than 500,000 people, but because of our location, our proximity to the border, many times you will get a lot of questions about safety, about security.
And it's sitting right next to Juarez, Mexico, the most dangerous city in the Western Hemisphere.
Juarez, Mexico, just across the border from El Paso, Texas, has earned the reputation of being the most deadly city in the world.
The irony that split between those two cities allows El Paso to be the operational base for all sorts of illegal activity.
It is the safest large city in America. It's run by the cartel. And the law enforcement, for the most part, is bought and paid for. Not a lot of people have respect for police. The criminals certainly don't. But what they have fear of is an organization that doesn't have Fourth Amendment and doesn't use jail cells, and that's a cartel.
Juarez is the most violent city in the world, ahead of countries like Colombia, Iraq, Afghanistan, and most of those countries are at war.
Cartel wants El Paso to be the shiny penny where everything is good, don't look behind the curtain over here, everything is wonderful. And so it's known by the gang members and the criminals in all the area. You draw attention, you hurt a police officer, you do anything that interferes with their business, they'll melt you in a bucket of acid and not think twice about it.
There's an enormous amount of corruption in El Paso. Some of it is just straight up greed. It's cartels with lots of money and they're willing to pay. They consider those payments to be essentially insurance. It's their overhead operating cost. They need to have safety and security for the movement of their drug loads. And they do that by buying police.
The cartels have got businesses that are worth more than a couple $100 billion. And when you have that much money, money talks.
Farrell says the cartel's ability to completely control the El Paso region paved the way for a narco-terror partnership that many in government believed could never happen.
At one point, there's a school of thought that said that the cartels would never cooperate with terrorists because they'd be undercutting their own business. It simply isn't true. If you want to move something from point A to point B, a contraband item, and you need their assistance, there's a price tag with it. It's all about making money.
If you open up the Al-Qaeda training manual, it's basically a book on how to be a criminal in a westernized world. Everything that narcos do and that they do when they come over into the United States is the same thing that they're teaching their operatives to do as well, because it's quick, easy ways to get money without being tracked. And it's big money.
There are militant Islamists, jihadis, in Mexico teaching and helping the cartels to perfect their poppy harvesting techniques.
They serve as another purpose as well as narcotics. They use their Middle Eastern experience of fighting for decades to train the cartel armies.
The best thing that they have going for them is that we're predisposed based on, and when I say we, I mean the West in general, as they understand Islamist ideology, they figure it's opposed to narcotics trafficking in general, and therefore that jihadists would never work with narcotics guys. And what you learn when you study this ideology is that Islamic supremacism is in many ways mainly a way to rationalize doing things that would otherwise be against the law as long as they further the cause.
So is El Paso, for lack of a better term, a narco-terrorist cell in the United States?
Yes.
No doubt.
No doubt.
I think this whole story, this whole narrative is a game changer on the border debate, because what we're talking about is a national security threat. This is a question of whether or not our border is secure from terrorists who want to destroy America.
Farrell says that the North American narco-terror network is what allowed Al-Qaeda operatives to move freely inside the United States.
For Shukr Juma to travel into the United States with El Banay is a calculated risk. because of the vulnerability to them being most wanted terrorists and why they would fly into the United States. The flip side of that is that, from their perspective, there's no more secure place to operate in the United States because of the level of compromise in El Paso. They had a very high assurance that there'd be no action taken against them.
Once they landed in this remote airport community, Farrell says Shukrajuma and El-Baneh traveled to a private home to meet with operatives working in and around the El Paso area.
Imad Karakra, who goes by the nickname Jaime Karakra or Imad, is a logistician and transportation operative for militant Islamists in the United States. He moves people, money, drugs, weapons from El Paso up to Chicago, over to Brooklyn, New York, and Saddlebrook, New Jersey. He's been described to me by law enforcement as a crazy, dangerous thug. Imad Karakra is a jihadi operative working on United States soil in El Paso and Chicago. And over the course of our investigation, law enforcement at several levels have confirmed to me exactly who Karakra is and what he's done.
Also in the meeting, a truck driver named Hector Pedrosa Huerta.
Hector Pedrosa is an illegal alien who worked for a large transportation services company in El Paso, multiple DUI violations, and a great close friend of Karakra.
Farrell says his sources confirmed that both men had ties to the Vicente Carrillo Fuentes cartel and operated out of small businesses along the U.S.-Mexican border.
Hector and Karakra hung out together at a string of used car lots on a road called Donovan. The businesses themselves may be legitimately licensed and formed, and the owners may be law-abiding persons, but I'm just telling you that this collection of guys that we've been talking about were operating out of, and you'll see auto sales, the first one, the second one, and then the third one. And these are places where they hung out.
Farrell says the main purpose of the meeting was to identify terror targets in the United States.
What was the target then they decided on?
So there's two targets. If you think back to 2009 and sort of the status of Oprah Winfrey and what her position was and what her influence was, and they decided to go after her studios in Chicago. And then the other was the Sears Tower, which obviously is a huge landmark and symbolic of the city of Chicago itself. So there's this meeting in Anthony, New Mexico with Shukrajuma, El-Baneh, Karakra, Pedrosa, and the purpose of this meeting is to pick a target, and the target is the truck bombing of Oprah Winfrey's studio and the Sears Tower. So in 2009, I think it's not an exaggeration to say that Oprah Winfrey was at the sort of apex of her career. You had President Obama coming into office. She was a big supporter from Chicago, another connection there. So there's some symbolism here.
She represents a lot of the things that they just do not like over there. She's a female, she's powerful, and she's outspoken, and she has a lot of money, and they're not particularly fond of that.
So in their calculus, they have always tried to do big, spectacular attacks on symbols of the West, but not just any symbols, ones that show that the power of the West, which is what is supposed to be so daunting in terms of what they're up against, is something that crumbles when they put their mind to making it crumble. There's a psychological aspect to a jihadist war, which they've always been very mindful of and which has been critically important to them. So it's the same rationale.
It is a 9/11 scale operation. This is a truck bombing involving a step van, a delivery type van, and a trailer. Both of these vehicles were to be loaded with tannerite, which is a binary explosive. To supplement or to augment the explosion, these same plotters obtained C4, the military plastic explosive. And interestingly, they obtained that C4 from Fort Bliss, Texas, which is in El Paso. And so someone on Fort Bliss was selling military explosive C4 to terrorists.
I knew a guy that worked for one of the cartels. He had all the passes to get into Fort Bliss, to get out, and I've seen him with explosives. I don't know how Fort Bliss explains losing them, but he ended up with them. He would say that whatever he needed, he could get.
This is the way it works. You've got a contractor, somebody who's doing construction work or some kind of service work for the Army on Fort Bliss, and they've got a gate pass that basically gives them unfettered access to all sorts of places. And through personal contacts and just good old-fashioned, criminal networking, they find people and they say, look, we're going to sign out 50 pounds of C4 explosive to go conduct training. And so they blow up 40 pounds and there's 10 pounds of C4 left over. And then the guy with the gate pass drives onto post and picks it up and drives off. And nobody knows the better. And that sort of process is exactly what occurred in order to get C4 off the post and into the hands of people for this Chicago bomb plot.
How close was your source when you learned this operation?
I have sources that know the names of the people who picked the C4 up off the post.
There are still ways to get military-grade explosives. You just need to know where to get them. And that's where, again, the meeting with the cartels and the knowing the cartels. I mean, you got to remember the cartels work in another country completely. I mean, it comes down to theft, and you would think it would be easier to track than it is, but unfortunately, in this day and age, there's a lot of people that aren't doing their jobs as well as they should be doing them.
The tannerite actually came into the United States from Mexico. So there's cross-border movement of binary explosives from Mexico into El Paso. That raises an interesting question regarding the sophistication and the complication of the operation itself. This is not something that's easily done. It requires thought, preparation, money. It's a sophisticated operation.
Farrell says that as the Chicago bomb plot was launched, something happened. The operation was foiled by law enforcement. However, it's unclear if anyone was ever arrested for attempting to launch a terror strike on the United States.
But at some point short of Chicago, and I don't know exactly where, but at some point short of Chicago, they are interdicted. The plot itself, the plotters are stopped. The details of which, frankly, are a mystery to me. I do not know exactly how, when, where, how, all those sorts of things. I just don't know. But that served as the vehicle, or served as the opportunity for the FBI to make its recruitment pitch to Caracra.
Farrell's investigation led him to believe that rather than arrest the men who were directly involved in trying to launch a large-scale terror attack on the city of Chicago, it appears the FBI felt Caracra would be more valuable as a confidential informant, or CI.
Nothing gets a guy jammed up more than their CI. When you're dealing with these types of individuals that are driven by an ideology, you have to be very careful because they may be playing you, because they don't care. They're thinking about eternity. They're not even concerned, a lot of them, with the next 20 years in prison if they had to.
Let's remember the best informants are going to be the people who convincingly are bad guys, because they were bad guys at the start. If you're not sure of where their loyalties lie, you never know whether you're getting double dealt.
Farrell says what he found odd about the Chicago bomb plot was the scant media attention it received during a period when a series of attacks were attempted on American targets.
We have breaking news. The FBI says it has thwarted a terror plot.
According to the FBI, this was a plot to blow up 2 synagogues and a community center, all in the Bronx.
While Najibullah Zazi is at the center of a vague plot to attack New York.
This is one of the most serious plots we've seen from Al-Qaeda since 9/11.
The FBI says the Fountain Place building was the target today of a suspected terrorist.
The 19-year-old said he wanted to serve as a soldier for Osama bin Laden.
The FBI likes to tout foil plots. And these are instances where the FBI identified persons who were I guess, disposed to take these sorts of actions, and they did a sting operation. So in those instances, they take great credit for having done this. But in the case of Ahmad Karakra, there's no federal action taken.
It seems to me that the two strongest possibilities are, one, for political reasons, they want to minimize Al-Qaeda attacks, and two, for political/embarrassment reasons, if there's any possibility that people who were implicated in plots were providing cooperation to the government, that's not something they'd want to broadcast.
This plot involves two of the senior most wanted Al-Qaeda operatives in the country. This is not the FBI's idea. This is not the FBI recruiting their own people to run a sting operation against somebody. This is Al-Qaeda entering the United States and organizing and conducting a bombing attack, or planning to.
The administration will decide what to call things a lot of the times based on political decisions or because they don't want to scare people. I think, that's really what it boils down to a lot of times.
Well, this story shows also that when it comes to the terrorist threat from the border, every town is a border town, because when you learn about the fact that a terrorist threat was in Chicago, folks in Chicago probably aren't thinking that we're going to be threatened by terrorists from the border, but the fact is they were.
In August 2014, 5 years after the failed plot to bomb Chicago, the man the FBI believed they turned into a confidential informant appeared to have gone rogue.
A man waving an ISIS flag out of his vehicle last week on the south side and threatening police with a bomb.
I get a phone call about Ahmad Karakra trying to blow himself up in a gas station in Chicago.
And again, the allegations are a bomb threat against police officer and his apparent endorsement of the terror group ISIS.
The FBI recruited Karakra as a confidential informant. The problem is they lost control of him.
His name is Ahmad Karakra. He was arrested here at 77th and Kedzie after a high-speed chase.
As Karakra is driving through the city, leading the police on this chase, he's flying an ISIS flag out the side of his car. This is an effort, in my estimation, at martyrdom by cop. Karakra was freaking out, was going through this demonstration because he believed the rest of his network was being rolled up both in El Paso and in Juarez.
On August 29, 2014, Federal and Judicial Watch reported that federal officials had issued a warning bulletin for an imminent terrorist attack on the border.
I've had Homeland Security and DEA sources, as well as other human intelligence sources, tell me that there was an effort on the part of Homeland Security in Mexico to identify terrorists in Juarez who were considered to be a threat in late August, early September of 2014. There were stories of truck bombs on the bridge from Juarez into El Paso. There was concern about the movement of improvised explosive devices across the New Mexico border near a place called Mount Riley. There was a lot of chatter, a lot of operational activity on the Mexican side of the border.
Meanwhile, Chicago police took Karakra into custody in August 2014, but not federal custody. He was held in Cook County Jail.
Karakra was sitting in Cook County Jail on state charges of making a false bomb alarm, which I find unimaginably underplayed. This guy is an established, known criminal thug. He's been involved in a bomb plot. He just days before had threatened to blow up a gas station with an ISIS flag after leading police on a chase. And he's charged with nothing more than a state charge of making a false bomb alarm, which I think it's mind-boggling.
More questions than answers today after the court appearance of a man at the center of a Chicago terror plot.
Yet another delay in the strange case of Ahmad Karakra. Cook County prosecutors once again asking for a continuance.
I personally went out to one of his hearings, sat in the courtroom, watched Judge Clay preside. These are very short status conferences. At the point that I was there, the public defender representing Caracra wanted to move things along, and the prosecutor deferred, saying that they had not completed discovery, that they were waiting on the FBI to provide additional information concerning Mr. Caracra. And that statement was made in open court. To me, that closes the loop on the claim that Mr. Caracra was a confidential informant.
Was there an FBI agent present during any of his arraignments?
In the January 2015 final hearing, where Mr. Caracra essentially pled out, they call it a 302 conference in Illinois. Before the proceeding began, an FBI agent came into the court, nodded and waved at Caracra, spoke with the prosecutor, and then took a seat.
There's some connection with the FBI and the federal government with Caracra. Like I said, he's got a get out of jail free card.
There's no way to describe it or explain it. I mean, there is no good answer. Anybody else would be charged with engaging in terrorist activity and locked up for the rest of their lives.
You know, he does something that's outside the lines and you don't crack down on him. You don't rip up the informant agreement. You don't prosecute him as you said you were going to. At that point, you've lost control of the situation and you're inviting bad things to happen, because you basically are telling the informant, if I can get away with this, they'll rationalize letting me get away with anything.
During this same period of time, Hector Pedrosa Huerta was arrested for driving under the influence.
Interestingly enough, I found that Hector Pedrosa Huerta was sitting in jail, and to the best of my knowledge, Homeland Security wasn't even aware they had him in custody. And so that information was conveyed to Homeland Security, who went down to the El Paso County Jail and attempted to interview Pedrosa. And when the agents arrived to interview him, this illegal alien who'd been 3 times removed and on his 3rd DWI suddenly had 3 attorneys. The agents there described them as Armani suit attorneys. 3 Armani suit attorneys arrive on the scene to stop Hector Pedrosa from being questioned. It's extraordinary.
Why would anybody care about him?
He would be a linchpin in that nexus of a narco-terrorist cell. If Hector Pedrosa were leaned on, he would cough up names, dates, times, places, things that would be very, very dangerous to very powerful people. His hearing was in December, and shortly thereafter, within a matter of 2 to 3 months, he was released. And so he too is now free, wandering around El Paso. No deportation, no supervised release, and he's free to go. A sweetheart deal like none other.
A top Al-Qaeda leader wanted in the US over a bomb plot has been killed during a raid by the Pakistani military.
According to the Pakistan Army, Adnan Shukri Juma was shot dead by troops near the Afghan border.
Effectively, he was the number 2 in the organization, and all operations are coordinated through him. So he is a very significant kingpin in the whole organization.
In early December 2014, I think it's December 6th, Pakistani Special Forces kill Shukri Juma in a raid.
The only reason he ended up in Pakistan got too hot for him as a result of our reporting. A few weeks after we highlight his role in the Chicago Oprah plot, he gets killed by our allies in Pakistan. Dead men tell no tales.
All this happens around the same time?
Correct.
What do your instincts tell you about the timing?
It ties things up neatly in a bow. You have Caracra free to go for time served. Hector Pedrosa Huerta, again, free to go, time served, no deportation, no supervised release. And within a couple of weeks of the same time period, Shukri Juma is killed by Pakistani Special Forces. And so the 3 principals of the 2009 bomb plot are either dead or on the loose and underground.
According to Judicial Watch, ISIS is operating a camp just a few miles from El Paso, Texas.
In April 2015, Federal and Judicial Watch released a report saying that ISIS had established an operating cell just miles from the U.S. border.
But the sourcing came to us through a Mexican Army field grade officer and a federal police inspector who became aware of this through these operations in an opera. And this operational cell, it's estimated between 3 and 5 guys, uses an opera, uses Juarez as a safe haven for operational planning, reconnaissance, because they know that they can come and go as they please with little or no interference.
The speed at which ISIS is growing and the amount of money that they've acquired, the amount of weapons that they themselves have acquired over in the Middle East would make it very easy for them to come to the border, work with narco groups, or just come into an area and pay their way across. They have access to ships. They certainly have access to massive amounts of explosives over the Middle East. They could simply bring this stuff over and smuggle it up themselves and come across the border.
Do you believe there's an ISIS camp 8 miles from the border?
Yes, sir. I do. I heard about it, and it's not surprising because the United States has got a very thin underbelly, and that underbelly is right here along the United States-Mexican border.
Federal sources that told me at least at one time there was 7 different camps identified, not only in and around Juarez, but also farther inland.
Directly across from where we are is the Juarez neighborhood or area of an opera. Sometimes this portion of Sunland Park is even referred to as an opera because in days gone by when the border wasn't quite as marked out as it was, this was sort of a no man's land for smuggling. The road we just turned off of, Calle Morocco, on that street back there, one of those buildings is believed to be used as a drop house or a safe house for the cell in an opera that comes across into the United States.
Safe house for who?
For ISIS operatives. I mean, I guarantee you the minute we turn down this street, we may not have seen it or heard it, but they saw this vehicle pull down the street and somebody's looking close and they see a camera. But the word is out that somebody's in the area who isn't normally here. Somebody's poking around, somebody's got cameras. These are real threats. This is not make-believe.
Farrell's reporting forced a response from the director of the FBI.
I know because there's been a lot of attention to this in the media that has reached my eyes and ears in Washington. There's been media reports about, is there an ISIL camp across the border here in El Paso? Nonsense, right? Not true. It frustrates me a little bit that my folks have to run out such things, because we do run out every tip to make sure there isn't something to it. There is nothing to it.
To me, listening to what FBI Director Comey says about ISIS, I don't know where he gets his information from, but the information on the street is a lot better than what he's saying.
It flies in the face of everything that's been known down here for over a decade, to include all the agencies down here that know different. The comments from my network were just arrogance, and I guess maybe the rest of the country will believe that. Nobody down here will. We know better.
I think the pushback is extreme, and I think the hysterical pushback tells you we're onto something. They've got anti-ISIS investigations going on in 50 states. ISIS is all over the place, but it's not in Mexico. It's so stupid that it's obviously political.
There's never, ever been a terrorist organization, or a terrorist plot that has successfully entered this country through the southern border.
Mr. O'Rourke is an idiot, and I'll tell you why. Because he's speaking way out of the lines of his knowledge. Unless he himself has sat and put eyes on every inch of that border over the past 15 years, he has no way to know. And there are not eyes on every inch of that border. I can guarantee you that they have exploited that. And if they haven't been using it regularly, they have been exploiting it to see if they can. And for him to say that, that right there answers your question. Why don't politicians and certain executives in law enforcement see this? Because they're inept. And they actually believe, because they got elected to a position, that they know more than the people that they serve. And they don't.
Farrell maintains that the nation is at risk as long as the El Paso region remains under the control of the cartels, and federal officials and agencies are compromised and purposely ignoring enforcement.
It's El Paseo del Norte, right? It's the passage to the north, the way north. It was founded as a smuggling city, as a way station for people moving north and south, and it serves that same basic function and premise today. It is the way into the United States, and it's a safe haven.
What you have here along the border is you have cartels, you have corrupt law enforcement, you have terrorists, and any one of those three groups could turn on you on a dime and kill you, kill your family.
Now that we know the story, what keeps you up at night?
The level of sophistication of the terrorist threat based out of Mexico isn't just underreported, it is actively knocked down by our government and this current administration. There are camps in Mexico where terrorists both conduct activities, receive training, get new identities, language, culture, clothing, training, and are moved into the United States. We have an enormously porous border with an incredibly corrupt law enforcement apparatus or system in the El Paso area, and we are whistling past the graveyard.